Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. It's Yvonne from Ginger Chick Rehab. I'm so glad to have you back today. And if you're new here and visiting my channel for the first time, welcome. I do lots of DIYs, trash to treasure, furniture flips with my husband Chris, and thrifting adventures to fit into the farmhouse decor. So in today's video, I am participating in the Upcycling Ugly Thrift Challenge. This is a challenge hosted by Sherri of Pretty Simple Sherri. And Sherri's co-host is Lisa Burningham. So if you have not checked out these two ladies' channels, you sure should. They do some awesome DIYs and some trash to treasure and some thrifted adventures themselves, so you should really check out their channel. So this Upcycling Ugly Thrift Challenge, well, I am a thrifter, so that fits in perfectly, and I thrift stuff that people no longer want, and I always repaint it to get it to sell for my retail booth. And so I thought this was a perfect challenge to jump on and participate in, because it's something that I already do, even though I don't necessarily think that everything's ugly, but it is unwanted, so maybe that puts it in that category. So I took 4 thrifted items that were unwanted and I fit them into my farmhouse theme, and this is what today's video is all about. So what do you look at when you see this bookshelf that has a clock in it? Or this navy blue shadow box, what do you see? What do you think of when you see this little wooden candle lantern? Or this hunter green knickknack shelf? So when I see all these items at the thrift store, I see the hidden beauty they can be. So I know somebody gave this clock some love, and that is a beautiful paint job, but it just does not fit into my decor of farmhouse. And then though the mechanism did not keep time, I knew that I could buy another one on Amazon. And I could see beyond the blue paint and the flowers that were beautifully painted on this, and I knew that I could definitely give this a new life. And I knew that I could give this little lantern new life just by painting it white to fit into my farmhouse decor. And then I could just see past this hunter green on this shelf and just could imagine that painted white and updating that golden to some walnut. And I have a piece of this white beadboard. Do you have any idea what I might be doing with this? So one of the first things I needed to do was to take this back off of the clock and replace that mechanism and make sure that it was working properly. And then my next tackle was to remove all the hardware off this shadow box. I always try to remove every hardware that I can to paint it separately. I just think you get a better paint job. And previously this shadow box must have had curtains in it, so I'm going to completely remove these little hooks, and I'm not going to replace this with curtains. And what you may not have seen about this little lantern, that it was filled with candle wax. It was overly used and never taken off, and I can see somebody just keep passing it up. But a little heat gun and some careful wiping off will eliminate that wax. And what I can't remove with the heat gun, I just scrape off using it's kind of like a pick, but I don't really want to scrape the wood. And I am going to remove that metal ring. So now let's see what I can do with this two-tone shelf. Can I remove this paneling that's on the back of it? I have to say it only had one little small nail in each of the 4 corners, and so I actually was able to tap it out just with the back of that staple remover I was using. And then just use a hammer to tap them out the other way and remove those 4 little nails. And then for any of the hardware, I'm just going to soak it in some hot water with a little bit of Murphy's oil soap, and that'll help me able to clean off any paint that was left on that metal. And since I could not remove this clock, I needed to tape it off as much as I could. I did not want to accidentally spill tape or scrape it when I was trying to sand it, so I completely covered it with tape. And now where all these flowers were painted, I just have to go in and hand sand to it as smooth as I can get it. So as far as sanding goes, I'm just going to use my rotary sander, and I'm going to get off all that paint on that paint that is a hand paint job, so then it's raised. And so I decided that I'm going to take it over the entire piece, especially on the edges, because I really want the black to grab on those corner edges when I go to distress it. And for this piece, since I am not going to be replacing where those little hooks were for the curtains, I'm just going to hit it with a little bit of spackle. And the same thing for the main part of the shadow box. I'm going to run the rotary sander over it. I'm going to try to remove those painted flowers and then try to hit the edges, so when I do paint it black and I want to distress it, that paint will soak into that fresh wood. So for this little candlestick, I'm going to have to hand sand a little bit of it. You can see where some red candle had stained, and then anywhere that I accidentally scraped it or already had scraped, I'm just going to sand that off. I want to distress it, but I don't want to look like it's been worn and used. So my hopes for these little drawers in the back of this shelving, that I can sand this all the way down so I can change that golden into some darker walnut. I have to say I'm pretty happy with how they sanded down. So for the green outer shell of it, I did take the rotary sander to as much as I could, and then I needed to hand sand because I really want those edges to be natural wood so that the black paint soaks in, so when I go to distress it. So now that I have everything sanded and prepped, I'm going to give it all a good cleaning with Crud Cutter. Just because I sanded it does not mean that it's completely clean. You want to get any kind of oils or residue left behind from sanding so you have a great prep surface. So for the base underneath coat, I'm going to give it my ready to use black onyx flat, and I'm going to give every one of these pieces at least 1 to 2 coats. So for this little shadow box, it's easier for me to stand it upright and work from the back into the front. Sometimes you have to flip a piece, and just laying it down on the table doesn't always get all those little corners and crevices. And I did the same thing with this smaller shelf. I stood it up on its side, standing up, so then I could get into all those pieces and parts, and kind of flipped it on one side or the other side to make sure that I got all the spaces covered. So as not to forget about this beadboard, I want it to be matching the other pieces. So I need to give it its couple coats of black before it's white also. So while that first coat of black is drying, I'm going to go ahead and use my Waverly Dark Walnut Wax and see if I can get these pieces stained up. I really like this wax. It's such a quick, especially for projects like this. I'm not sure I do it on a huge table or big piece of furniture, but for nice little accents like this is perfect. So when I say in my videos it just takes as many coats as it takes, this is 1 coat on this bookshelf clock, and then this is 1 coat on these other pieces. Every wood is completely different on how it accepts the paint. So now some of the coats that I only did 1 coat of black, and then others I had to do 2 or maybe a 3 touch up. I'm onto my Kills Paint and Primer in 1, and this is in flat white, and now I'm going to give them all their coats of this. And I'm going to do the same thing with the shadow box and the shelf, as I'm going to stand it up, and I'm kind of work from the back to the front so I can make sure that I have everything covered. So I always say painting, especially when you're doing multiple items, is kind of like a round robin game. You just keep, by the time and especially in this hot heat of the summer, that, the first piece you started with is dry and the last piece is wet. So you just keep working around the tables until you get it all as many coats as it is needed. So for the hardware, I got it all cleaned off. The Murphy's helps. Any of the hinges were pretty much the only thing that had any paint on it. And once you've heated it up, that paint really does not absorb into the metal, so it comes off pretty easy. So now I'm on to giving them a Rust-Oleum paint and primer in 1 in the flat black. So I absolutely love how this changed that walnut Waverly Wax just changed this from a golden into that nice walnut. And now to seal it in, even though I know the wax will seal it in, I'm still going to give it a couple coats of the polyacrylic, just to make sure that that is nice and sealed in. And just in case there was any splatters, I just take a little bit of a foam brush and just run it over it. And then after 2 coats of the polyacrylic, after I let it completely dry, I just take some very light steel wool and just run it over just to make sure that it's nice and smooth. So now it's on to sanding all the other pieces now that they've gotten all their white and it's completely dry. And what I like to do, and why I wanted to sand off so I got down to natural wood that the black soaked in, is I like to take my 220 sandpaper and I like to go over those sharp edges and just let some of that black and some of that natural wood show through. And then on the rest where it's not an edge, I just lightly sand it just so that it's smooth, and I don't really want a lot of distressing. So the same thing for this little candlestick. I'm just going to run that sandpaper so that it a little bit harder on the edges, so some of that black and some of that natural wood shows through, and then a little bit lighter over the flat part. And the reason I gave this beadboard a black undercoat is because I wanted to sand it and distress it also. So as I'm rubbing the sandpaper on those little sharp edges of the spaces in between, some of that natural, which is unfortunately white, but some of that black is coming through. So now that most of the pieces are sanded and distressed, it's on to finishing them up with the Varathane Finishing Wax. And for these little drawers, I decided to keep the tape on, only because I guess, sometimes that wax isn't as easy to get off the glass, and so I just leave it on while I'm waxing. Now for these little drawers, you can see that there was a stain spilled in them, and for me that's not acceptable, especially since I'm a reseller. So that's why I kind of hoard this leftover pieces of the contact paper. So I am going to put that in the bottom of these little drawers so you don't see that stain that I can do nothing about. So now after the Varathane wax is dry, it does actually dry, and I can go through with a razor blade and make sure that I'm not going to be, I do the razor blade because some of the paint gets stuck to the tape, and then I don't have to worry about pulling off my paint. And then I can take the little razor blade X-Acto knife and just get off any buildup that might be. So you don't want to see a messy paint job. You want to see a nice clean paint job. And now as I start to return the hardware to where it needs to be, I'm going to clean off this window, make sure that I try to get all that wax off and any paint that might have got on the window. And I just use my Norwex cloth. I absolutely love these. So I bet you can tell now what we did with that piece of beadboard as I'm returning the hinges to where they belong. Sometimes when my husband helps me, he forgets that I need to video. So I'm sorry I did not get video of how he attached the beadboard to the back of this shadow box. But luckily I caught him before he was doing this smaller shelf, so he will show you what he did to match up where he can staple. So see where he's just marking a line that he knows where those pieces are wood that he'll be able to staple in, and then he does it on both sides of the back of the item. And then he's going to take this board, match it up kind of like a ruler, so he knows exactly where he can staple. Remember, this poor little piece was not held in more than 4 pieces or 4 nails, so this way this one will be more secure. So I saved this bookshelf / clock for the last. It didn't look very big, but once you put it on its side, it is a beast. So there is a lot of sanding to do. So I'm doing the same thing where I go harder over the edges where I want that detail, that distressing to show. And then when I get to the flat, I just kind of lightly just to smooth the paint out so you don't feel those brush strokes, and it's just nice and smooth to the touch. Now to finish up this clock face, I'm going to be removing the tape because I know that there's going to be paint buildup and that I could not get all the way to, you might see some wood once you open the clock to set the time. So I'm going to be removing the tape and then going back in and sanding and to any of that raised paint that was glopped on because of the tape. It just happens. And then take a little brush and just touch up where the wood is showing and it needed to be fixed. And then I'll give its final finishing coat of the Varathane Finishing Wax all over the entire piece. So my plan was never really to try to paint the brass of this clock, but that brass just needed to get a paint job. So I thought it would pop out a little bit better with the white and the black numbering of this clock. So I taped the heck right out of it so that I did not get black paint on what had previous paint, and then taped up that front of that clock, and then just used an X-Acto knife just to get the part that I wanted to paint. And I knew I wasn't going to be able to spray this, so I did have this Rust-Oleum and Satin Canyon Black. So I thought I could take just a regular little paintbrush, and even though that it would be more time consuming than painting with a spray paint, I did not want to make a mess out of this clock, but I just wanted that brass to pop a little bit by painting it black. But I will not be painting the underneath because I know that the opening and closing will wear that paint off of metal. So what white paint does for a piece, it took this unwanted, ugly, wax-covered lantern candle and just gave it new life, and now it can fit into that farmhouse theme that I just absolutely love, and I think it can fit into anybody's decor. So what do you think of this two-tone piece? I would like credit for this, but I actually saw that Robin Johnson on her new DIY channel, I'll link that below, had done a look like this, and I absolutely loved it. Can you even remember the flowers on this shadow box now? And just look how that beadboard just beefed this whole shadow box right up. I just absolutely love all that molding and all the detail, how black undercoat and some white paint just made that all pop. And this is just a beautiful, massive piece now that anybody should be proud to display in their home. I just absolutely love that beadboard as a backing on it. And what do you think of this bookshelf / clock? I know that sounds like a weird combination, but it actually just flows. And I just love bringing it up into my farmhouse decor and updating it just a little bit. Even though those were beautiful flowers, I know that somebody hand painted with love. I absolutely love that I did that little detailing of the black just to make that brass pop out a little bit more. So which one of my 4 repurposed, ugly, unwanted thrift store items did you like today? I thank you so much for watching today's video, and don't forget to check out Sherri of Pretty Simple Sherri and Lisa Birmingham's channel. You sure will really enjoy their content, along with the playlist of all that participated in this ugly thrift store challenge. So again, I thank you so much for watching today's video, and if you're part of my YouTube family, thank you so much. And if you'd like to become part of my YouTube family, please consider hitting that subscribe button.